So if you look at, like, the broad sweep of human history, there's this one glaring problem that, you know, billions of dollars, thousands of legislative bodies, and centuries of advanced education have just completely failed to fix.
Right.
And it is the problem of evil. I mean, we can cure diseases that used to wipe out continents, we can split the atom, we can send rovers to Mars, but we just can't seem to stop ourselves from destroying each other.
Yeah, it's wild when you frame it like that.
It really is. Like, we can't legislate away greed, we can't educate away cruelty, and we definitely can't medicate away this profound sense of brokenness that just seems baked into the human condition.
Yeah, completely baked in.
Right. So why is that? Why, despite all our progress, does the fundamental flaw in human nature remain so stubbornly resistant to every single human solution we throw at it?
Well, I think it forces us to ask whether we've been misdiagnosing the illness all along. Like, if a patient comes into a hospital with a systemic blood infection, and the doctors spend all their time putting Band-Aids on the surface-level skin lesions.
The patient is still going to die.
Exactly. The patient is going to die. The Band-Aids might cover up the unsightly symptoms for a few hours, but they do absolutely nothing to address the microscopic pathogens that are multiplying in the bloodstream.
Wow.
And a lot of worldviews, historically and currently, they treat the problem of human evil as a surface-level lesion. They treat it as a lack of education or a byproduct of poverty or bad urban planning.
Or like an outdated psychological mood that we just need to therapy our way out of, right?
Right, exactly.
Which brings us directly to you, the listener. Because whether you're a student prepping for a heavy theology seminar, or you're someone trying to decode the inner workings of the Christian worldview, or you're just insanely curious about the architecture of massive belief systems, welcome to today's deep dive.
It's going to be a fascinating one.
It really is. We are exploring a highly provocative document compiled by Chris R. Velazquez. The entire package, complete with these incredibly detailed infographics, is titled The Defeat of Evil: Satan, Sin, and Death Are Conquered. And the reason we're spending so much time on this today is because the premise of this source material is radically different from the Band-Aid approach you just described.
Yeah, the premise here is structural. It is entirely cosmic. Our mission today is to really unpack the sheer architecture of the storyline this text lays out.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because this isn't just about managing grad behavior, is it?
No, not at all. According to this material, evil is not a social accident. It is a real, destructive, conscious power that actively corrupts individuals. It enslaves entire communities, and it fundamentally distorts human culture.
So it's claiming a total, final, and absolute victory over a hostile occupying power. Like, if you are trapped in a burning building, you don't need someone to toss a self-help book through the window.
Right. You need a firefighter to kick the door down and pull you out.
Exactly, a rescue mission.
Yeah.
And according to the author, this cosmic rescue mission is aimed at delivering humanity from 3 very specific, highly lethal enemies.
Yeah, to understand the nature of the rescue, we have to start by thoroughly understanding the hostile forces being fought. The source material identifies what it calls a threefold enemy.
And those are Satan, sin, and death.
Right, correct. And a crucial point the author makes right out of the gate is that these are not 3 separate, independent problems that just happen to be running around in the universe simultaneously.
They're connected.
Deeply intertwined. They are the core expressions of a fallen existence. They function almost like a dark, inverted ecosystem.
They feed off each other. Let's start with the first one the text identifies, which is Satan. The author describes this figure as the deceiver and the accuser.
Yes.
But there is a very specific boundary drawn here regarding his power. Like, the text acknowledges him as the ruler of this world, but it places a massive asterisk next to that title.
Right, he rules in a strictly limited sense.
Yeah, his primary weapons aren't raw, unadulterated power or the ability to create alternate realities. His weapons are deception and accusation. The text says he twists the character of God and tempts humanity into a state of total autonomy.
And that limitation, that is vital to the entire framework of the document. Like, in some ancient dualistic religions, you have a god of light and a god of darkness, and they're essentially equal opposites locked in an eternal arm wrestle.
And the outcome is sort of up in the air.
Exactly. This text explicitly rejects that. Satan is not presented as a rival god with power equal to the creator. He is a created being.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he operates on a leash. He has boundaries he cannot cross. Because he cannot create anything from scratch, his entire methodology is based on perverting what already exists. He's an agent of chaos, yes, but he is a subordinate agent of chaos.
So he's a creature who deceives. which leads directly into the second part of this threefold enemy, which is sin. The text labels sin as the corruption that enslaves.
Yeah.
And this is where I think modern readers might experience some friction with the source material. Like, we usually use the word sin as a verb. It's just a bad thing you do. You lie, you cheat on your taxes, you steal a candy bar, you sinned. But the author is very careful to define sin not primarily as an action, but as a condition.
Yeah, the author is making a profound philosophical distinction here. They argue that sin is not merely a behavioral issue, it is an ontological issue.
Okay, let's pause right there because ontological is a really heavy piece of philosophical jargon. What exactly does it mean to say something is an ontological problem rather than a behavioral one?
Well, ontology is the philosophical study of being. It asks the question, what is the fundamental nature of this thing?
Right.
If sin were merely a behavioral issue, it would be like having a bad habit like biting your fingernails. You can train yourself to stop biting your fingernails with enough willpower or by, putting that bitter polish on them.
Yeah, it's an action you choose to take.
Exactly. But if sin is an ontological issue, it is woven into the very fabric of human nature itself. It is less like a bad habit and more like a genetic mutation that has altered the fundamental operating code of a human being.
Oh, wow.
The behavior, the lying or the stealing, is just the symptom. The root cause is a corrupted nature that bends inward on itself, constantly choosing its own autonomy over connection with the source of life.
That drastically changes the scope of the problem. If it's a genetic mutation, no amount of behavioral coaching is going to rewrite your DNA.
Yeah,
You are fundamentally compromised at the core level.
completely compromised.
And that inevitably leads to the third enemy the text identifies, which is death. It's labeled as the final enemy that destroys. The author insists that death is the wages, the ultimate consequence of this rebellion and inward corruption.
Right.
But here's the part that really caught my attention. The text goes out of its way to emphasize that death was not a natural, intended part of the original design.
And that is a massive collision with modern secular thought.
Oh, totally.
In a purely materialistic worldview, death is simply a biological endpoint. It is natural. It's the necessary recycling of carbon back into the ecosystem so new life can emerge.
Yeah. It's emotionally difficult, but ultimately it's just the cost of doing business in a physical universe.
Exactly. But the source material violently disagrees with this. It categorizes death as an alien invader. It is an unnatural intrusion.
Wait, really? An alien invader?
Yeah. Humanity, according to this framework, was fundamentally designed for uninterrupted fellowship and life, not for the grave. Death is a hostile power that has violated the original blueprint.
So we have a deceiver, an ontological corruption, and an unnatural end to life. What does this all mean for the individual listener trying to process this worldview?
Oh.
It actually brings to mind the concept of a computer virus.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. Think about how a virus operates. A computer virus cannot exist on its own. It has no hardware. It doesn't have a motherboard or a power supply. It is entirely parasitic.
Right, it needs a host.
Exactly. It requires a healthy operating system, a good, functioning, beautiful code base to attach itself to.
Yeah.
And once it attaches, it begins to rewrite the good code, corrupting the system from the inside out until the whole machine crashes. Evil, as described by this text, seems exactly like that virus.
The text actually supports that analogy perfectly when it points back to the origin story in Genesis. It explicitly asserts that the original creation was good, ordered, and filled with life.
That is the healthy, pristine operating system.
Yes. Evil has no original substance of its own. It cannot create a world. It can only invade and pervert the good world that already exists.
I see.
It takes the natural, healthy human desire for sustenance and perverts it into gluttony. It takes the natural, healthy desire for intimacy and perverts it into exploitation. It is a parasite draining the life force of the host.
And the reason you, the listener, need to care about this specific diagnosis is because your definition of the problem will dictate your entire approach to the solution. Like, if you truly believe the fundamental human problem is just a lack of data ignorance, then your solution is to build a better library or write a better textbook.
Right. If you believe the problem is purely environmental, you try to engineer a better society.
But if you accept this text's premise that the problem is a hostile spiritual parasite, an ontological corruption of human nature, and an alien invader called death, then education and social engineering are like bringing a squirt gun to a thermonuclear war.
That's a great way to put it.
You need an intervention from completely outside the infected system. You need a rescue mission that is capable of engaging and defeating a hostile cosmic power.
Which brings us to the architecture of that rescue mission. How does the author claim this threefold enemy is actually defeated?
Yeah.
To explain this, the text zooms out as far as it is conceptually possible to go. It presents a massive, overarching timeline that it calls From Eternity to Eternity.
A 12-step timeline.
Yes,
Right.
12 stages. It attempts to map the entire history of the cosmos, not just human history, to show how this rescue operation was executed.
It's an incredibly comprehensive framework. And the narrative doesn't even start with the creation of the Earth. It starts in eternity past.
Right.
The text cites these ancient passages which contain this mind-bending phrase about the Lamb being slain before the foundation of the world. The central argument here is that the defeat of evil was not a panicked reaction to a sudden crisis.
No, God's eternal plan already included the victory before the universe even existed.
Right.
The author uses a very specific, deliberate phrase. They say the cross was never an improvised rescue mission.
So it wasn't Plan B, because Plan A suddenly fell apart when humanity rebelled.
Exactly. The text presents this as a profound theological comfort. It asserts that evil did not arise outside the knowledge or the ultimate authority of the Creator. The victory was completely secure before the battle even began.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
If we follow that logic all the way down, it raises a massive philosophical red flag. If God planned the victory, specifically the sacrifice of the cross, before the foundation of the world, before anything was even created, doesn't that imply that he essentially set a trap? Like, if you have the antidote prepared before you even build the room, doesn't it suggest you knew the poison was going to be released? Or worse, that you engineered the release of the poison just so you could ride in as the hero and administer the cure?
That is a very common objection, yeah.
How does the text deal with the implication that God is the author of the very evil he is claiming to defeat?
That is the ultimate tension in theology, often called the problem of theodicy. How do you reconcile a perfectly good, all-powerful God with the existence of evil?
Right.
The source text navigates this by holding two seemingly contradictory truths in tension without offering a clean, mechanistic equation that perfectly resolves them for the human mind. First, it vigorously defends the absolute sovereignty and goodness of God. Second, it places the full moral culpability for the entry of evil squarely on the rebellion of the created beings.
But how do those two things coexist? If the system was designed by God and the system failed, doesn't the liability ultimately rest with the designer?
Well, the text points to the concept of autonomy and the nature of love. For the original operating system to be truly good, the creatures within it had to possess genuine agency.
Meaning they had a choice.
Yes. They had to be capable of freely choosing to remain connected to the Creator, which fundamentally requires the capacity to choose disconnection.
Oh, I see.
The author argues that God permitted the possibility of rebellion as a necessary condition for genuine relationship. He foresaw the rebellion, and in his sovereignty, he decreed that he would allow it to occur rather than create a universe of biological automatons.
Right.
However, foreseeing and permitting an event is not the same as morally coercing it.
So it's the difference between a software developer knowing a system has an open port that a user could theoretically exploit versus the developer actually writing the malicious code themselves.
Precisely. That is a perfect way to look at it.
Wow.
The developer writes an airtight patch before the software even ships because they know the vulnerability exists if the user misuses the system. When we look at the next phase of the timeline creation and the fall, the text emphasizes this distinction.
Right.
It states that God created a demonstrably good world. Evil is not original to the design. There is no dark matter baked into the cake from day one. The watershed moment happens during the fall.
Right. The fall. This is where the virus is officially downloaded.
Exactly. The text describes the mechanics of the fall carefully. Satan, the deceiver, introduces the idea of autonomy, but the actual breach happens because humanity, representing the users of the system, chooses to trust the creature over the creator.
They decide they want to define good and evil for themselves.
Right. They click the malicious link. That choice is the entry point for the ontological corruption of sin, the ensuing shame, and ultimately death.
Yeah.
So, addressing your earlier pushback, the source text insists that the moral blame rests entirely on humanity's free choice to rebel. The focus of the eternity past concept is not to explain why God allowed the risk, but to assure the reader that because God is sovereign, the temporary victory of the parasite was never a threat to the ultimate outcome.
The antivirus patch was always going to work.
Exactly.
That makes the narrative incredibly tragic, but also deeply purposeful. Humanity is fallen. The pristine operating system is now deeply infected. The threefold enemy has breached the gates and is actively dismantling the goodness of creation.
Yeah.
And the logical expectation, if you are a completely holy and just creator, might be to simply wipe the hard drive, delete the infected files, format the drive, and start over from scratch.
Sure.
But what's fascinating is that the text shows God responding not with immediate apocalyptic destruction of the infected system, but with a promise.
Which brings us to the covenant phase of the timeline. Instead of annihilation, God initiates a long, slow process of reclamation. The author directs us to the very first announcement of the rescue mission in the early texts. It is a promise made in the immediate aftermath of the fall, and the imagery used is stark and violent.
What's the imagery?
It promises that a future human descendant will eventually crush the serpent's head, but in the process, the serpent will strike and bruise his heel.
Okay, that specific imagery, crushing a head versus bruising a heel, tells you so much about the nature of the coming conflict.
It really does.
Like, crushing a head is a definitive, fatal, unrecoverable blow to the enemy.
Wow.
But a bruised heel means the victor is going to absorb significant damage.
Right.
It is a promise of absolute victory, but it explicitly guarantees that it will not be a bloodless victory. The hero is going to suffer in the act of defeating the villain.
It establishes the paradigm that evil will eventually be defeated through suffering and sacrifice. The text then traces how this covenant promise is carried forward through ancient history. But as it traces this history, the author highlights a devastating realization that emerges during this era.
What's that?
As you read through the historical accounts, you quickly realize that the enemy isn't just out there.
Right. Because it's so easy to read ancient history and think the problem is just the hostile neighboring tribes or the oppressive empires,
Oh, absolutely.
The bad guys are the ones wearing different armor on the other side of the border.
But the text points out that the very people chosen to carry this covenant promise constantly fall into the exact same patterns of idolatry, injustice, and corruption as the surrounding nations.
Wow.
The law is given to them to show them what a healthy operating system looks like, but they are completely incapable of running it.
Because of the ontological corruption.
Exactly. This proves the earlier point. The corruption is internal. The enemy is entrenched in the human heart. Therefore, any rescue mission cannot merely be a political liberation from an external empire.
Evil has to be defeated socially and spiritually, externally and internally.
Exactly.
The virus is in the host's DNA. You can't just put them in a sterile room. You have to cure the blood. Which sets the stage for the absolute climax of this cosmic narrative, the redemption phase, the decisive battlefield.
Yes.
The author centers this entire phase exclusively on the person and work of Jesus Christ. And the text is extremely aggressive in how it frames the crucifixion. It insists that the cross is not merely an instrument of forgiveness, it is an instrument of conquest.
The author cites ancient letters to build this case. The imagery shifts from a courtroom where a judge is pardoning a criminal to a battlefield where a king is completely disarming a hostile occupying force.
Right.
The text systematically breaks down how the cross addresses and defeats each member of that threefold enemy we identified earlier.
Let's walk through that breakdown because the mechanics of how the text claims this works are really fascinating.
Yeah.
How does the cross defeat Satan, the deceiver and accuser?
Well, according to the text, Satan's primary power is accusation. He points to the legitimate, unpayable moral debt that humanity owes due to its rebellion, and he demands judgment.
Okay.
But the text states that at the cross, the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands was canceled, literally nailed to the cross and paid in full. If the debt is legally canceled, the accuser has no more ammunition.
You cannot take someone to court for a mortgage that has already been paid off.
Exactly. Satan's power to accuse is entirely broken because the legal basis for the accusation has been removed.
It completely revokes his standing in the cosmic courtroom.
Then how does it deal with sin, the inward corruption?
The text argues that the condemning force of sin is broken because the rescuer willingly absorbs the curse and the penalty that the corruption demands. He takes the ontological sickness of humanity upon himself, exhausts its destructive power, and in exchange offers his own perfect righteousness. It is an exchange of natures.
Yes.
And finally, death, the ultimate enemy. How is death defeated by someone dying?
By entering into the very heart of it and breaking it from the inside. This is where your earlier analogy is incredibly
The
useful.
cosmic judo move.
Yes, the judo
I
move.
keep coming back to this idea because it perfectly captures the paradox the author is describing. Like in the martial art of judo, the entire philosophy is built around not using your own brute strength to overpower a heavier, stronger opponent.
Right.
If a massive opponent charges at you, you don't brace yourself and try to stop them like a brick wall. You will get crushed. Instead, you step aside, grab their uniform, and you use their own sheer weight, their own violent momentum against them.
Use their power.
Exactly. You guide their energy in a way that throws them to the mat and breaks their balance. The text explicitly says the apparent weakness of the cross is the instrument of divine triumph.
It is the ultimate subversion of power dynamics. The author is describing the crucifixion as God absorbing the absolute maximum momentum of evil. Satan, sin, and death throw every weapon in their arsenal at Christ's betrayal by friends, corrupt religious trials, false accusations, the brutal physical torture of the empire, the ontological weight of human sin, and finally, the grave itself.
They execute their maximum power.
Yes, but Christ, being infinite, absorbs the finite power of evil, exhausts its momentum entirely, and uses the event of death to shatter the permanent hold of death.
He uses death to defeat death.
Exactly. It is the defining paradox of the Christian worldview. And then, the resurrection 3 days later acts as the public historical vindication that the judo throw actually worked.
The empty tomb is the receipt.
Yes. It is the undeniable proof that the momentum of evil was broken. The author uses a very specific agricultural term here. They call the resurrection the first fruits of the defeat of death.
Let's translate that for someone who doesn't live on a farm. What does first fruits actually imply in this context?
So, in an ancient agrarian society, the first fruits were the very first crops that ripened and were harvested at the beginning of the season. When a farmer went out and gathered that first basket of ripe wheat, it wasn't the entire harvest, but it was the absolute guarantee that the rest of the harvest was coming.
It proved the crop was healthy and the season was turning.
Exactly. By calling the resurrection the first fruits, the text is arguing that his victory over death is not just an isolated one-off miracle for one guy 2,000 years ago. It is the prototype.
It is the historical guarantee that the permanent defeat of death for everyone connected to him is an absolute certainty.
The harvest has begun.
I want you, the listener, to stop and think about how profoundly this reframes the entire human concept of power and victory. Like, we're conditioned by everything in our culture, from corporate boardrooms to geopolitical conflicts, to believe that power looks like domination. It looks like unassailable strength, overwhelming force, and never showing weakness. But in the architecture of this worldview, the ultimate victory was won through apparent, total, humiliating defeat. It asserts that true power often looks like unimaginable sacrifice.
It completely dismantles the human ego and our assumptions about what it takes to conquer darkness.
This brings us to a massive, glaring question. It is the elephant in the room for literally anyone listening to this deep dive right now, regardless of their background.
Okay, what is it?
If the debt is legally canceled, if Satan's power of accusation is revoked, and if the fundamental power of death was broken at the cross 2 millennia ago, why is the world still so broken?
Yes.
Like, why do we still get terminal cancer diagnoses? Why are there still genocides and wars? Why do people still betray each other? Why do we still have to attend funerals? If the author claims the war is decisively won, why are the casualties still piling up every single day?
That is the most urgent, practical question a human being can ask, and the source text does not shy away from it. It addresses this exact tension in the next massive phase of its cosmic timeline, introducing a theological framework often referred to as the already and not yet.
The already and not yet.
Yeah. This concept bridges the gap between the historical event of the cross and the final consummation of history. The author breaks this down into several overlapping stages: kingdom, exile, restoration, Messiah, and church.
Let's walk through how those stages explain our current reality. Start with the kingdom stage. The text argues that during his life, the miracles, the physical healings, the restoring of sight, the exorcisms, they were not just random acts of kindness.
No, they were calculated signs of the kingdom of God invading enemy territory. They were localized demonstrations of what the ultimate restoration would look like.
So the author states that at the cross, the final verdict on evil was rendered, but the execution of that sentence is placed in the future.
Right. To understand how a war can be won while casualties still occur, we need an analogy that captures the messy reality of a defeated but still dangerous enemy. Often people use the analogy of a major battle that decides a war months before the final peace treaty is signed.
Yeah.
The decisive blow has been struck, the enemy supply lines are cut, their capital is surrounded, and the outcome is mathematically inevitable. The verdict is rendered. However, the enemy troops in the field haven't surrendered yet.
They are still shooting.
Exactly. In fact, because they know they are losing, they might fight with even more desperate, destructive ferocity.
You know, I've always thought of it like a venomous snake that has just had its head cut off by a shovel.
Ooh, graphic, but yes.
The decisive blow has been struck.
Hmm.
The snake is definitively biologically dead. It had no future. The verdict is rendered. But if you've ever seen a decapitated snake, the nervous system continues to fire for a while.
Right.
The body thrashes around violently, and the head can actually still bite you and inject venom if you get too close. It is a dead thing, but in its death throes, it is still incredibly dangerous.
That is a very visceral, highly accurate representation of what the text describes as the exile phase. The church and humanity at large is currently living in the overlap of the ages.
We are living with the thrashing body of the snake.
Yes. The new creation has been inaugurated, but the old creation has not yet been fully dismantled. The text notes that all of creation is currently groaning under the weight of this prolonged transition.
Groaning, yeah, that makes sense.
It acknowledges that believers still experience deep temptation, brutal suffering, and persecution. Satan is described as a defeated foe, but he is a defeated foe who is still permitted to thrash around on a leash. The decisive victory is in the past, but the final, peaceful reality is not yet.
Okay, so if we are living in the exile phase, if we are occupying a hostile environment alongside a thrashing, dying enemy, how does the text expect people to actually survive that? Like, what is the practical mechanism for living in the overlap?
Well, because the author provides a deeply detailed section on spiritual warfare, specifically pulling from this armor of God metaphor. And this is where the text's definition of warfare completely flips our expectations upside down again.
It really does. The author emphasizes that believers are called to actively resist the remaining thrashings of evil, but they do so through their union with the victorious Christ. They do not fight to achieve victory, they fight from a position of a victory already secured.
And you are right, the nature of the weapons is entirely counterintuitive.
Let's talk about those weapons.
Yeah, the text lists the armor, the
Yeah.
belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit.
Right.
The author is insisting that our response to a hostile world isn't passivity. We aren't supposed to just hide in a bunker and wait for the clock to run out. We are called to be active combatants. But look at the weapons. Truth, righteousness, peace.
It doesn't sound very marked. No. If I'm going into combat, shoes of peace doesn't sound like it's going to do a lot of damage to the enemy. How are these things actually offensive weapons?
You have to remember the nature of the enemy. We are not fighting flesh and blood. We are fighting a spiritual parasite whose primary weapons are deception, corruption, and division.
Oh, I see.
You cannot defeat a lie with a physical sword. You can only defeat it with truth. The belt of truth is a weapon because it dismantles Satan's primary tactic of twisting reality. When the enemy tries to exploit your inward corruption, the breastplate of righteousness, living with integrity and relying on Christ's standing, protects your vital organs.
And the shoes of peace. How is peace a weapon of war?
Because evil feeds on division, hostility, and fractured relationships. That is its food source. When a community is tearing itself apart with gossip, hatred, and factionalism, the parasite is thriving. When you actively choose to step into a fractured relationship and create peace, you are starving the parasite. You are cutting off its supply lines. The author provides a brilliant summary of this mission. They say, wherever reconciliation replaces hatred, holiness replaces corruption, and mercy replaces violence, the church bears witness to the coming age.
That is profound. Every single time you choose to forgive someone instead of retaliating, every time you choose integrity over a convenient lie, every time you show mercy to someone who deserves judgment, you are not just being a nice person.
No, you're not.
You are actively planting the flag of the coming kingdom in the middle of enemy territory. You are launching a localized offensive against the dark ecosystem. You are demonstrating to the thrashing snake that its time is up.
Exactly. It infuses everyday moral choices with cosmic significance. The church is fighting localized skirmishes where the ultimate outcome of the war is already mathematically decided, but those skirmishes matter intensely because they rescue people from the collateral damage of the enemy's death throes.
Which inevitably leads us to the final chapters of this massive storyline. We've traced the architecture from eternity past through the tragic breach of the fall, the violent rescue of the cross, and the messy, dangerous, already and not yet of our present reality.
We're almost at the end.
Now, the text moves to the moment when the not yet finally becomes reality. This is the final act, covering judgment, the millennium, the new creation, and eternity future.
Right, and the transition out of the overlap phase requires a definitive final accounting. The text points to ancient apocalyptic literature to describe the judgment phase.
What happens there?
It states unequivocally that Satan, death, and all forms of unrepentant evil are finally cast into the lake of fire. The author makes a sharp, unyielding statement here. Evil does not merely weaken or fade away over time. It ends. It is destroyed.
This is arguably the most controversial part of the entire framework for a modern audience.
Oh, without a doubt.
The concept of a final, definitive, punitive judgment, especially one utilizing intense imagery like a lake of fire, is deeply unpopular today. It is often viewed as primitive, archaic, or entirely contradictory to the idea of a loving God.
Yeah.
If God is fundamentally love, as this worldview claims, how does a final, seemingly violent judgment fit into that equation? The author anticipates this pushback, right? They know people will call this concept cruel or view it as some sort of petty divine vendetta.
Yes, they do.
But the text pushes back incredibly hard. It argues that justice is not the opposite of love. Justice is actually the ultimate expression of holy love. How does the author build that argument?
The author builds it by returning to the core definition of what evil actually is. Remember, it's a destructive, invasive parasite.
Right, the virus.
If you truly love something, you must naturally hate that which seeks to destroy it. Consider the analogy of a brilliant, deeply compassionate oncologist. This doctor loves their patients fiercely. Because the doctor loves the patient, how must they feel about the cancer that is eating the patient alive?
They have to hate the cancer. They have to be absolutely ruthless toward it.
Exactly.
If the doctor says, I love you so much, I'm just going to accept this tumor and let it do whatever it wants in your body, that isn't love. That is horrific malpractice. Love demands the excision of the disease.
Precisely. And that is the exact philosophical logic the author applies to the final judgment. The text argues that a sentimental therapeutic gospel that never actually judges or removes evil doesn't actually defeat it.
Oh, that makes sense.
If God simply ignored evil at the end of human history, or just sort of smooths it over without dealing with it, he would be allowing the corruption, the abuse, the exploitation, and the death to continue polluting the cosmos forever.
Wow.
The author states, a world renewed in righteousness cannot coexist forever with unrepentant evil. God's judgment is the necessary surgical removal of everything that destroys life with him.
The cancer cannot be allowed into the new operating system. It has to be permanently quarantined. Death itself, the final, ultimate enemy that has caused every tear ever shed, must be completely, entirely destroyed.
Which is the necessary prerequisite for the final stage, the new creation and eternity. With the parasite fully excised, the original design can be fully restored and elevated.
Yeah.
The text quotes the famous ancient promise, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The author emphasizes that in this final state, evil is not just repaired, it is not just managed, it is completely absent.
The thrashing snake is finally thrown into the fire. The threat is gone forever. And the text points out that this ultimate destination completely rejects the concept of dualism. Eternity is not an endless, exhausting 50-50 struggle against the darkness.
The war is over.
It is everlasting light and uninterrupted fellowship. Now think about what that means for you, the listener, living your actual life right now. The text is insisting that this specific future hope is not just a comforting bedtime story. It is the ultimate moral weapon for surviving the present darkness.
Right.
Hope, in this framework, isn't blind optimism. It isn't crossing your fingers, knocking on wood, and wishing for the best. It is a rock-solid, defiant confidence rooted in a guaranteed outcome.
Yeah.
If you know exactly how the story ends, if you know the author's already written the final chapter and the villain is permanently defeated, it radically changes how you read the scary, seemingly hopeless chapters in the middle of the book.
That realization bridges perfectly into the final major section of the source material. The author understands that high-level cosmic theology is entirely useless if it doesn't touch the ground of everyday human experience.
Exactly.
So the text outlines the practical street-level implications of this grand timeline, and very helpfully, it lists 6 common dangers or misunderstandings that people fall into when trying to live this out.
Let's dive deep into those dangers, because this is where the rubber meets the road. The author practically puts big red warning signs around these 6 pitfalls.
Yeah, they do.
Danger 1 is denying evil's reality, pretending the snake isn't actually dangerous. Danger 2 is overestimating evil's power. Danger 3 is ignoring your own personal sin. Danger 4 is forgetting the cross and the resurrection, trying to fight in your own strength. Danger 5 is treating the final judgment with bitterness rather than trust. And danger 6 is treating the defeat of evil as an instant reality and losing your patience when suffering continues.
I want to spend some time exploring the intense practical tension between danger number 2 and danger number 3, because this is a trap almost everyone falls into.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Danger 2 warns against overestimating evil's power. The text explicitly says we should not live our lives as though Satan were sovereign. He is a defeated foe on a leash. The author writes that fear only belongs to the victims of evil when Christ is forgotten. We shouldn't be giving the devil more credit than he is due or seeing a demon under every rock.
Right, he isn't God's equal. He's a squatter who has already been served an eviction notice.
Great analogy. But immediately, the author provides the necessary counterweight in danger 3, neglecting personal sin. The text points out how incredibly easy and hypocritical it is for humans to become obsessed with fighting the evil out there in the world.
Oh, we love doing that.
We do. We love to critique the culture, argue about politics, point fingers at systemic corruption, and wage war against external darkness, while completely and totally ignoring the mundane, everyday evil festering in our own hearts.
It is so much easier to get furious at a news headline about corporate greed than it is to look in the mirror and apologize to your spouse for being incredibly selfish that morning.
Exactly.
It is easier to crusade against external enemies than to face the ontological corruption still lingering in your own habits.
And the author argues forcefully that you cannot effectively fight cosmic structural evil if you are actively harboring the infection of personal sin in your own private life. The gospel, according to this text, demands that repentance begins at home. It demands brutal honesty about our own capacity for darkness before we start trying to excise it from society.
I really appreciate how the text applies this theology to the raw reality of human pain. There is a section dedicated to the practical implications for suffering believers, and it is incredibly moving.
It really is.
The author writes, "The defeat of evil gives courage in pain. Death is not ultimate. Oppression is not final." This takes all of that massive high-level theology, the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, the cosmic judo of the cross, the final judgment, and turns it into a gritty survival tool for a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, that's what makes it so powerful.
If you are sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room waiting for biopsy results, or if you are facing a massive systemic injustice that seems immovable, this theology walks into that room and says, this terrible moment does not get the last word. The snake might bite you, but it cannot consume you.
The text is highly practical, demanding what it calls holy living as an actual offensive weapon in this ongoing overlap period. It reframes the concept of repentance. Repentance isn't just feeling guilty or sad that you broke a rule. The author describes it as an act of allegiance to the victorious king. When you are tempted by the corruption of sin and you choose holiness instead, when you choose honesty over deception or generosity over greed, you are literally planting the flag of the kingdom in enemy territory. You are participating in the victory.
It's all brilliantly connected. The grand sweeping timeline from eternity past to eternity future isn't just a fascinating thought experiment. It is specifically designed to inform and empower exactly what you do tomorrow morning. It teaches that evil is terrifyingly real, but it is not ultimate. The darkness is active, it is thrashing, but it is fundamentally not final.
That is the core synthesis, the absolute beating heart of the entire source text. The author summarizes it perfectly. They say, Satan, sin, and death are conquered. That is the Christian announcement. Not ignored, not redefined, conquered.
What an incredible, exhausting, and mind-expanding journey through this material. We started by discarding the Band-Aid approach to human brokenness and identifying the true threefold enemy: the deception of Satan, the ontological internal corruption of sin, and the unnatural alien invasion of death.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
We unpacked a worldview that stretches back before time even began, where a rescue mission was engineered long before the virus was ever unleashed. We explored the brilliant, decisive cosmic judo move of the cross, where the sheer violent weight of death was absorbed and used to shatter the power of death itself.
Right.
We talked about the decapitated snake, the messy, dangerous already but not yet of our current lives, where we fight as active combatants using the counterintuitive weapons of truth and peace. And finally, we looked at the promise of the ultimate surgical strike in the new creation, where the disease is permanently removed and the universe is restored to uninterrupted life.
It truly is a comprehensive architecture of hope. It refuses to minimize the very real, visceral pain of our present reality, but it simultaneously secures the absolute joy of the future. It holds the tension perfectly.
And that brings us all the way back to the beginning. We talked about the frustration of trying to fix a systemic blood infection with surface-level Band-Aids. This text offers a diagnostic of the human condition that goes deeper than our behavior,
Yeah.
deeper than our environment, all the way down to our ontological roots.
Yeah.
It identifies a lethal spiritual parasite, yes,
Yeah.
but it also points to an absolute guaranteed, historically vindicated cure.
Beautifully said.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today as you go back to your life. If, as this text claims, the ultimate end of the universe is a place where the former things have passed away and there is absolutely, unequivocally, no more pain, no more corruption, and no more death.
Yeah.
How does living with the absolute rock-solid certainty of that specific future change the way you react to an everyday injustice tomorrow morning? If you truly believe the ending of the story is already written and the ultimate victory is already secured, how does that rewrite the way you live in your present?
That's a great question to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those massive questions, keep pushing past the Band-Aid solutions, keep exploring diverse perspectives, and we will see you next time.